The cabin of the private jet was a crystalline prison. Its silence pressed against my ears, and the sterile, dim lights cast shadows that seemed to follow me, accusatory and patient. Below, the city sparkled, a constellation of commerce, ambition, and indifference. Every flickering light reminded me of what I had built, and of the man who now sought to steal it all. I shifted in my seat, tasting the smoky afterburn of scotch lingering on my tongue. It wasn't the celebration I had imagined. Not tonight. My body betrayed me before my mind could even fully register the danger, the heaviness seeping into my limbs like cold ink. My pulse raced in a rhythm dictated not by excitement, but by treachery. Across the aisle, Ronan sat with the composure of a man who had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. He looked the same, handsome, perfectly tailored, his smile smooth, but it was a mask. Behind those eyes, the warmth I once believed in had hardened into ruthless calculation. And tonight, I tasted the truth of it. He never saw me as his equal. I had been a brilliant instrument, polished and displayed, while he absorbed the credit and schemed for control. "You should have left the controlling shares to the Foundation, Elara," he murmured, voice low and cold. "But you put them in a trust that reverted to the surviving spouse upon accident." Predictably sentimental. Sentimental. The word struck me like a knife. I had trusted him. I had built everything with him, not just a company but a life, a partnership that was supposed to be equal. And he had called my foresight sentimental, as if my careful planning were naive weakness. My vision blurred as panic and fury collided. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but my body refused. The scotch had been laced with something insidious, something calculated to paralyze. And yet, even in that haze, my mind burned with awareness. Every thought of betrayal, every flash of memory of late nights, boardroom battles, sleepless nights, and sacrifices crystallized into a single, cold realization. I had underestimated him. "Don't worry," he continued, glancing at his watch as if timing my death were a pleasant pastime. "The flight altitude and the rapid paralysis will suggest a sudden, severe embolism. Tragic, and very, very profitable for the sole surviving partner." I tried to focus, to catch a fragment of the man I once knew, the man I had trusted with my life and my ambition. But there was nothing left. Just the predator who had hidden behind charm and affection, and the knowledge that he had never seen me as anything more than a tool. And then, in the brief clarity that comes just before everything shuts down, a thought anchored itself. Not fear, not regret, a promise. If I survive or return, I would rebuild everything on my own terms. I would create a world where my mind, my heart, and my power were untouchable, where no one could manipulate, betray, or control me. The darkness came slowly at first, curling around my consciousness like smoke, seeping into my senses until I was weightless, adrift, and finally falling. But that promise, the sharp, electric spark of resolve, was a seed. Somewhere in the void between life and death, it took root. The first sensation that drew me back to life was light, harsh, fluorescent, and unrelenting. It hit the back of my eyes like a physical shove, forcing me to blink and recoil. I coughed, or at least tried to. The sound was hoarse and foreign, the mechanics of my own body suddenly strange and unfamiliar. My hands, once so used to commanding the world through contracts, presentations, and carefully executed strategies, were smooth, youthful, trembling slightly as they touched the cheap laminate of the desk I had collapsed onto. A clock on the whiteboard proclaimed the date, March 10th, 2012. I froze. The plane. Ronan. The betrayal. The paralysis. My heart slammed in my chest as I processed the impossible. I had returned. Not as a memory, not as a ghost, but as the 23-year-old version of myself. Alive. Unbroken, yet armed with the knowledge of a future that had already devoured me. The city outside the co-working space buzzed with the energy of ordinary life. Taxis honking, the faint scent of street food drifting in from the avenue below. Everything seemed ordinary, mundane, safe. And yet, inside, I felt a cold, razor-edged clarity. This was my second chance. My opportunity to rewrite every decision, to rebuild without the mistakes that had cost me so dearly. I checked my laptop, running through financial reports, early drafts of AI algorithms, and the nascent structure of Synapse Global. Ronan's name appeared in the small print of an angel investment proposal. At 23, he was charming, ambitious, and utterly untested. He had not yet learned the cruelty that would later define him, the greed and the calculated deception that had nearly killed me. And now, armed with foresight, I had a weapon he could never anticipate: knowledge. My first instinct was to isolate, to disappear into work and become a ghost once more. But the analytical part of me, the part that had always driven Synapse to dominance, was already calculating the stakes. My patents, my AI modeling, the foundational technologies that would later become Synapse's most lucrative assets. I could secure them, shield them, and ensure that no one, not Ronan, not anyone else, could manipulate them without my consent. Then there was Finn. I remembered the name like a beacon, a single point of light cutting through the fog of my memory. Finn Adler. The one man whose reputation would, years later, stand as a counterweight to Ronan's manipulation. The man who valued ethics as much as ingenuity, whose integrity made him almost untouchable in the world of ruthless acquisition. He was cautious, deliberate, and brilliant. And if I could align myself with him, leverage his influence and platform, I could not only protect my creations but set the stage for the exposure and dismantling of the man who had tried to destroy me. But first I had to survive the present. I began my day meticulously, almost ritualistically. Breakfast was minimal: a cup of black coffee, bitter enough to match my resolve, and a single slice of whole-grain bread. Every movement was deliberate. I traced the memory of my previous life like a map of potential traps, noting the small inconsistencies in Ronan's timeline, the patterns he had not yet formed, and the weaknesses he would exploit in my younger self. I scoured the early digital landscape, observing Ronan's fledgling investments, his charm campaigns with young entrepreneurs, and the subtle maneuvers he used to position himself as a man of influence. He was patient, calculating, but still predictable. And I had the advantage of foresight, a luxury few ever enjoyed. My first actionable move was to secure my patents anonymously. The future had shown me the vulnerabilities. If I had registered them under my own name or even under the guise of Synapse, Ronan would find a way to claim, corrupt, or leverage them against me. Now, I set up a shell corporation with layers of encryption, obscure legal pathways, and trusted intermediaries. Every step was deliberate, every document coded with contingencies for every possible interference. Even as I worked, a shadow of the trauma lingered. Every reflective surface, every passing glance, brought back flashes of the jet cabin, the coldness of betrayal, the taste of scotch tainted with malice. I reminded myself, repeatedly, to channel that memory not into fear or hatred, but into precision. I had survived once. I would not survive again without strategy. It was during a late afternoon session, while reviewing predictive models of market trends, that I first stumbled upon the data point that would eventually lead me to Finn. The man's work in AI ethics, long dismissed as cautious or slow by my future self's colleagues, was already emerging as a bastion against the type of manipulation Ronan would eventually wield. The more I examined his papers, the more I realized the alignment. His vision was not just compatible with mine, it was complementary. Where I had the ruthlessness and the tactical foresight, he had the ethical structure and credibility that could shield our combined moves from scrutiny or sabotage. I reached out tentatively at first. An email, and signed Analytical, referencing his research and proposing a theoretical collaboration on systemic bias detection in early AI. My language was careful, precise, detached, authoritative, yet offering a glimpse of shared vision. I could not reveal everything. Not yet, but I needed him curious enough to engage. The reply was almost immediate. Finn Adler's prose was direct, thoughtful, and unflinching. He did not flinch at my suggestions, did not condescend, and questioned every assumption I had laid out. For a moment, I allowed myself a small, private satisfaction, a partner who demanded excellence, who would challenge me, not manipulate or use me. And just like that, the first thread of an alliance was spun. I paused and looked out the window, the sun now dipping low, painting the city in streaks of molten gold. My heart ached, not for the past, not for Ronan, but for the clarity of purpose I now held. I was 23, armed with the wisdom of decades I had yet to live. My mission was clear: protect my intellect, safeguard my creations, and dismantle the empire of betrayal before it had the chance to form. I closed my laptop and allowed myself a quiet moment. No triumph, no celebration, only a steady, deliberate acknowledgement of what was to come. The path ahead would be long, exhausting, and filled with dangers I could already foresee. But unlike before, I was not naive, and I was not alone. Finn Adler was the anchor I did not yet fully understand, and the first true ally I had in a world that had almost broken me. And for the first time since the jet cabin, I allowed myself a small, deliberate thought. I am not helpless. I am not prey. I am Elara. And this time, I will not fail. Days turned into weeks, though to me, time had a pliable quality now. Each morning I woke with a single, sharp purpose: prepare, anticipate, and protect. My apartment, small and deliberately unremarkable, became a war room. Post-it notes mapped out corporate connections, spreadsheets detailed the earliest threads of venture capital, and my laptop hummed endlessly with predictive models, simulations, and anonymized accounts. Everything had to be invisible to Ronan, and yet actionable. Every decision, every maneuver, had to move me closer to dismantling the empire he would one day build. I moved through the city like a ghost, unnoticed but observing, cataloging patterns in human behavior, market trends, and investment strategies. My world had narrowed to a delicate balance of discipline and patience. I avoided early interactions with Ronan, knowing that even a single misstep could alert him to the force building quietly in the background. And yet, even in this self-imposed isolation, I felt the weight of loneliness pressing against my chest. No one knew the truth of what I carried, the knowledge of a future life, a life that had ended on that private jet, but that burden was necessary. Secrets were weapons in this war. It was during a small, specialized technology convention that my path intersected with the man who would become not only my ally but my anchor, Finn Adler. I had registered under a pseudonym, ensuring that no one would connect the presentation to my true identity or to the future empire I would eventually create. My topic was foundational: systemic bias detection in early AI models. I spoke not as a pioneer, but as a meticulous analyst uncovering flaws hidden in plain sight. Every word, every diagram, was calculated to capture attention without exposing myself. After my session, a presence drew near. I looked up, and there he was, Finn Adler. The intensity of his gaze did not intimidate me. It dissected, analyzed, and understood simultaneously. He was precise, deliberate, and his reputation preceded him, though he did not rely on it. He simply existed as a man whose mind mirrored the same calculated rigor I now prized above all else. "Your analysis is frighteningly precise," he said, his voice calm but edged with curiosity. "You've identified flaws in early modeling that almost everyone, including my team, has overlooked. Tell me, what is your goal, Elara? To expose or to fix?" I measured my response. Every word had to convey capability without revealing the full depth of my knowledge. "Both," I said, my voice steady, though my heart thumped with the adrenaline of recognition. "The only way to correct a systemic flaw is to expose the rotten foundation it was built upon." He nodded, and in that gesture I saw understanding. Not patronizing, not impressed in a superficial way, understanding. "I agree," he replied, handing me a crisp, minimalistic card. "Ronan Valencia and others like him build empires on those flaws. I'm searching for a partner, a mind that anticipates the next wave of manipulation. Not just an analyst, but a guardian." The word guardian resonated deeply. It was not the language of conquest or of dominance.
It was respect.
It was acknowledgement that intellect alone was insufficient without integrity. Finn valued the mind, yes, but he valued the mind allied with ethical purpose. That perspective had been alien to me in my past life, where Ronan measured my worth only in utility and leverage. I did not immediately accept. Caution was paramount. I had seen how alliances could crumble under ambition or betrayal, and I was a student of those outcomes now. But the opportunity was too rare to ignore. I contacted him through encrypted channels, presenting him with anonymized data, predictive analytics on Ronan's early acquisitions, environmental assessments, financial red flags, all framed as a purely academic exercise. Finn's response was measured, analytical, and precise. He did not jump to praise, nor did he dismiss the information. He questioned, challenged, and demanded clarity at every step. I realized then that he would not simply follow my lead, he would think alongside me. That realization, this partnership of equals, was intoxicating in its own way. It was not infatuation, not desire, but recognition of rare, compatible minds. We began our collaboration in earnest. I remained anonymous at first, operating under the guise of a consultant who existed only in code, encrypted emails, and secure virtual meetings. I provided early intelligence on Ronan's highly leveraged land acquisitions, his planned mergers, and even potential legal loopholes he might exploit. Finn, in turn, leveraged Nexus Innovations' ethical credibility and public platform to monitor, audit, and publicly scrutinize questionable activity, ensuring that any misstep by Ronan would have consequences. The alliance, however, was not without its tension. I carried the full weight of my previous life's trauma, and every interaction with Finn tested the balance between caution and trust. I found myself hesitating before revealing insights, doubting whether my knowledge could be shared without compromising the plan. But Finn's patience, steady and unwavering, became a template for how partnerships could function without manipulation or dominance. He did not demand trust. He earned it by being reliable, competent, and thoughtful. One evening, as I analyzed a new series of transactions Ronan had begun quietly acquiring, the weight of what I had become pressed heavily upon me. The isolation, the hyperfocus, the endless calculations, it was exhausting. I leaned back in my chair, rubbing my temples, aware of how different this world now felt compared to the one I had lost. It was cleaner, yes, but lonelier, the stakes higher, the consequences far more precise. Finn's voice arrived through the secure video channel, calm and unassuming. "You've been at this for 14 hours, he said gently. "Even strategists need rest. Remember, the most effective moves come from clarity, not exhaustion." His presence was grounding. It was not physical comfort, not romance, not intrusion, just a steadying force, a reminder that even in a world driven by numbers, analysis, and ruthless ambition, one could find equilibrium. I realized, for the first time, that I had not only survived Ronan's betrayal once, but had found someone capable of helping me build a life that was both strategic and morally intact. The convention had been the first tangible connection to this new reality. The alliance with Finn, carefully constructed, represented the bridge between knowledge and action, foresight and influence, revenge and integrity. I was no longer alone. And for the first time, the future did not feel like a shadow looming over me. It felt like a challenge I was fully prepared to meet. In those quiet, calculated days, as I mapped the first moves in our chess game against Ronan, I began to understand a fundamental truth. Vengeance without principle was empty. My intellect, honed by foresight and sharpened by betrayal, needed a counterpart of unwavering integrity to guide it. Finn provided that. Not control, not domination, just steadiness, patience, and the certainty that, in our collaboration, neither of us would betray the other. And so, I stepped further into the world I had once lost, armed with both knowledge and a rare alliance. Ronan's empire was still in its infancy, fragile in ways he could not yet perceive. And I, Elara, was poised not merely to survive, but to recalibrate the balance of power entirely. The months following the convention were a blur of strategy, data, and carefully calculated moves. My life had become an intricate lattice of research, coded communications, and discrete investments. Every interaction with the early business world, every handshake, every email, was measured against the knowledge of what it would eventually become. I was no longer just surviving. I was anticipating, steering, and reshaping the future one precise move at a time. And then, inevitably, he appeared. Ronan Valencia. In the flesh, arrogant and certain, at a high-profile industry gala. He had aged in the usual, predatory way, the charm intact, the smile polished, the confidence brimming with self-assured entitlement. He scanned the room like a predator seeking a familiar prey. My pulse tightened, not with fear, but with the cold, analytical fury that had become my constant companion. He found me standing near the balcony, pretending to admire the city skyline, and his approach was casual, smooth, as though we had not been torn apart by betrayal and near death. "Elara," he said, the tone of false warmth coated with insinuation. "Still chasing minor leagues? Running with Adler? He's all ethics and no teeth. Come back to Synapse. We were a team, darling. You know your brilliance belongs with me." I measured my response carefully, each word a scalpel. The old me might have hesitated, might have been tempted by familiarity, by nostalgia. But the Elara who had faced death, who had tasted betrayal so intimately, was unyielding. "My brilliance belongs to integrity, Ronan," I replied evenly, meeting his gaze. "And I have learned that integrity requires an uncompromised partner. You saw my mind as a tool to own. Finn sees it as a challenge to respect." For a brief moment I saw it, the crack in his confidence. He understood suddenly that I was no longer the instrument he could control. I was a force in my own right, and the realization unsettled him more than any verbal attack ever could. The encounter left me unsettled in ways my analytical mind could quantify, but my emotional self still grappled with. My heartbeat lingered in my throat, a constant reminder of both the danger he represented and the intensity of what I had chosen to confront. I retreated to my apartment afterward, shutting the door with deliberate precision, and allowed myself to exhale fully for the first time in weeks. Finn was already waiting via secure channel. His presence, though virtual, was like a hand on my shoulder, not intrusive, not commanding, just grounding. He had tracked Ronan's movements quietly, his vigilance almost imperceptible yet profoundly reassuring. "He tried to intimidate you," Finn said calmly, eyes focused on the screen. "That's what he does. He relies on control, on fear. But you've already shifted the balance. He knows you're no longer prey." I slumped back in my chair, exhaustion mingling with relief. "It's exhausting," I admitted quietly, my voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. "The vigilance, the calculations, every interaction is a potential threat. I feel like I'm always half step ahead, yet constantly on edge." Finn leaned forward slightly, his expression unwavering. "That's the point of being strategic," he said softly. "You've survived once. You'll survive again. But survival isn't enough. You need an anchor. Someone who can remind you that your genius isn't just a weapon, it's a tool for stability, for building something lasting." And in that moment, I realized that Finn had become that anchor. Not by force, not by authority, but through presence, through patience, through unwavering acknowledgement of the magnitude of my intellect and the depth of my trauma. He did not demand trust. He cultivated it, quietly, steadily, until I understood that I could lean on him without losing myself. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in calculated pressure. Ronan's acquisitions continued, each one subtly influenced by the patterns he had learned to exploit. But our countermeasures were precise. I provided anonymized intelligence, predictive algorithms, and financial analysis, while Finn leveraged his ethical reputation to scrutinize, question, and make visible every potential misstep. It was a dance, a chess game in which every piece moved exactly as intended. One night, exhausted from reviewing the latest filings on Ronan's projects, I collapsed onto the couch. The strain of maintaining my dual life, The careful concealment of my true knowledge, the mental gymnastics of anticipating every possible outcome, was taking its toll. I felt fragile, unmoored, a storm-swept vessel with only the edge of my own resolve keeping me upright. Finn's voice came again through the secure line, gentle, grounding, unshakable. "Elara," he said softly, "he tried to make you brittle. That's his strength. He thrives when others fracture. But your brilliance, your foresight, it doesn't break. It bends, it adapts, it overcomes. Use it to build, not just to destroy." I closed my eyes, letting the words settle, grounding me. In the past, I had poured every ounce of my mind into revenge and control, and yet that approach had left me hollow, nearly broken. Now, with Finn's guidance, I realized that dismantling Ronan's empire was not enough. I had to build something stronger, something ethical, enduring. The destruction would follow naturally, a consequence of superior strategy and integrity, rather than blind malice. That night, for the first time, I allowed myself a measure of emotional release. I did not cry out of fear or rage, but out of recognition of how far I had come, of the intelligence and patience I had cultivated, and of the rare partnership I had secured. Finn did not intrude. He simply remained present, silent, unwavering, a lighthouse in the darkness of my carefully constructed vigilance. By the following morning, I was renewed. The blueprint of our next moves against Ronan was clearer than ever. Each acquisition he made, each maneuver, each overconfidence-laden misstep, would be met with counteraction designed not to harm blindly, but to reveal, to expose, and ultimately to nullify the threat he represented. In the quiet hours before dawn, I stared at the city from my window, lights flickering like distant promises. This was no longer a game of survival, it was a game of precision, ethics, and undeniable intellect. And with Finn as my anchor, my insight as the blade, I was ready. Ronan had underestimated me once, and he would not make the mistake of underestimating me again. I had become a strategist reborn, not just from death, but from betrayal, fear, and calculation. And though the storm of confrontation with Ronan loomed ahead, I felt a calm I had never known in the days of my first life. For the first time, I understood the power of an anchor. Steady, unwavering, protective. Finn had become that anchor, and with him, I would navigate the storm, unbroken, unyielding, unstoppable. The city woke in shades of gray and gold, a quiet hum of traffic and early chatter drifting through my apartment window. I did not notice it. My world had shrunk to numbers, data streams, and the invisible threads of corporate power that I could see with unnerving clarity. Every morning, I woke with a list of objectives so precise it left little room for deviation. This morning's objective, the first tangible strike against Ronan's fledgling empire. I reviewed the dossier I had prepared, each file representing a vulnerability I had identified years in advance, now actionable with the advantage of foreknowledge. Real estate acquisitions with hidden liabilities, early investments inflated by speculative projections, and contracts carefully worded to appear unassailable but legally flawed. I mapped out the order of exposure, anticipating his defensive maneuvers before he could even conceive them. Finn's secure call came promptly, his presence calm but charged with steady energy. "Ready for today?" he asked, his tone a quiet anchor in the storm of my thoughts. "I've outlined every step," I replied, voice taut with focus. "Every possible counter, every legal loophole, every financial ripple. Today is just the first move, but it sets the tempo for everything to follow." He nodded, as if he could see the mental gears spinning behind my eyes. "Then let's proceed." Our first target was subtle, almost innocuous to an untrained eye, a small land acquisition Ronan had quietly maneuvered through, designed to anchor his early reputation as a visionary investor. But I had seen the fractures, zoning conflicts, environmental liabilities, hidden debt obligations. The foundation of the purchase was unstable. If exposed, it would undermine both his credibility and the financial leverage he relied on. I drafted an anonymous white paper detailing the potential issues, framing it as an academic audit. Finn and his team translated it into a public scrutiny campaign, emphasizing environmental responsibility, regulatory compliance, and ethical investing. By the time Ronan realized the wave of attention the acquisition had drawn, the damage was already unfolding. Boards began questioning, legal advisors investigated, and investors hesitated. The beauty of the strike was not in destruction, but in precision. I did not need to attack directly. The foundation of Ronan's ambitions began to crumble simply by being illuminated. Knowledge and foresight had become my weapons, and integrity my shield. Yet, even in victory, the psychological toll was immense. Every notification, every email, every analyst's report reminded me of the stakes. If I made a misstep, the fragile advantage I held could collapse instantly. My body, though young and restored, still bore the imprint of my prior trauma. Every calculated success brought both relief and exhaustion. Finn's presence became even more essential during these moments. When the weight of anticipation and responsibility threatened to overwhelm me, he would check in, not to guide, not to command, but to steady. "You've planned this perfectly," he said once, quietly, as I stared at the screen late into the night. "Trust the system. Trust your foresight. You're not alone." It was a reminder I clung to, and slowly, I began to recognize the subtle strength of partnership. In my previous life, alliances had been transactional, exploitative, or manipulative. Here, with Finn, it was different. We were equal minds converging toward the same end. He did not fear my brilliance, nor did he underestimate it. Instead, he provided the foundation for me to act with clarity and confidence. The aftermath of the strike was immediate and telling. Ronan, sensing the scrutiny but unable to identify the source, became uncharacteristically aggressive. He doubled down on other acquisitions, tried to obscure liabilities, and leaned on charm to reassure investors. Each reaction he made confirmed my predictions. Each miscalculated move further destabilized the network he had once believed to be unassailable. And yet, I found myself confronting an unexpected internal conflict. The intoxicating precision of strategy, the satisfaction of witnessing his empire wobble, came with a strange emptiness. I had anticipated rage, vindication, maybe even relief. But instead, I felt the subtle weight of responsibility. I was not dismantling a faceless corporation. I was undoing the work of a man who had once shared my life. The memory of past intimacy, now irrevocably tainted by betrayal, was a cold undercurrent beneath the current of victory. I shared these thoughts with Finn in a rare moment of vulnerability. "It's not just him I'm confronting," I admitted quietly during a late-night video call. "It's the life I thought I would have, the trust one gave blindly. Every success reminds me of what I lost." He listened, silent but present, until I finished. Then he spoke, his voice steady and unshakable. "That's why you build with integrity, Elara. Not to punish, not to destroy for the sake of it, but to create something stronger. The past is gone. The betrayal was real. But you are building a future where no one, not even Ronan, can undermine your foundation." His words grounded me in a way that no amount of strategic calculation could. I realized then that the power of our alliance was not only in what we could do against Ronan, but in what it allowed me to do for myself. Reclaim agency, rebuild trust in my own judgment, and channel past trauma into structured, purposeful action. By the end of the week, Ronan's first missteps had made headlines in niche financial news outlets, quietly amplified by Finn's ethical oversight campaigns. He attempted damage control, but the foundation had shifted. The empire I had once known, fragile and dependent on deception, was beginning to unravel, piece by piece. As I reviewed the results, I felt a rare satisfaction, a quiet affirmation that intelligence, preparation, and ethical precision could not only counter ruthlessness, but surpass it. And, in the background, Finn remained a constant, silent presence, not a savior, not a partner in the romantic sense, but a stabilizing force I could rely on with unshakable certainty. That night, staring at the city lights from my window, I reflected on the subtle truth that had become my mantra: Strategy without ethics is temporary. Ethics without strategy is powerless. The first strike had proven that when they combined, the result was unstoppable. And with Finn as my anchor, I knew the storm ahead. Ronan's calculated retaliation, the intricate moves he would inevitably attempt, would not catch me unprepared. I allowed myself a small, rare smile. The first strike was only the beginning, but it was proof. The Elara who had nearly died was gone, replaced by a version forged in precision, foresight, and unwavering resolve. And the path to dismantling Ronan's empire, while difficult, had become clear. The chill of early morning air hit my face as I stepped out onto the balcony of my apartment. The city below was alive with traffic, distant horns, and the faint scent of rain-damp streets. Yet the bustle of ordinary life seemed alien to me now. Every light, every movement was a data point, a signal to be decoded. The world, for all its vibrancy, had become a chessboard, and I was moving pieces in anticipation of the moment they could strike. Ronan had sensed something. I knew it not from any overt warning, but from the subtle tremor of arrogance beginning to crack. In the last week, his acquisitions had become more calculated, defensive maneuvers emerging where previously there had been reckless confidence. It was a faint pulse, but one I could read as easily as my own heartbeat. He was aware that someone, somewhere, was unraveling the threads of his empire. He just did not know how or who. Finn's call arrived promptly, the secure line ensuring that every word we exchanged remained invisible to the world outside. "They're tightening," he said, eyes sharp and unwavering. Ronan's starting to notice patterns, small disruptions. He hasn't traced them to us yet, but he's circling, like a predator aware of a new apex in his territory. I nodded, though he could not see it. My mind raced through countermeasures, preemptive strikes, and the alignment of timing. Then, we accelerate. We reveal more than flaws now. We expose structural vulnerabilities he cannot hide, not yet, at least. The foundation must wobble before he can respond strategically. Finn leaned forward, intensity simmering beneath calm. Agreed. But this will be public. The exposure cannot be traced to Nexus Innovations directly, or to the Oracle Group. I reminded him, the careful anonymity we had preserved so far being our only shield. We cannot afford the slightest clue that might redirect his suspicion. I spent the day meticulously reviewing every transaction, every legal filing, every acquisition document from Ronan's emerging empire. It was exhausting, each layer of deception requiring precise unraveling, each calculated reveal timed to maximum effect. By mid-afternoon, the blueprint was ready. A multi-tiered exposure that would touch finance, ethics, and environmental oversight simultaneously. It was audacious, risky, but utterly necessary. As I began drafting the anonymized dossier, Finn's team coordinated external visibility. They framed the findings as a neutral, ethical investigation into emerging investment practices. Environmental liabilities were highlighted with expert commentary. Speculative financial maneuvers were analyzed with historical precedent. Every piece of the report was designed to illuminate, not attack. The narrative was clean, precise, undeniable. Yet, as the plan crystallized, my heart refused to settle. I remembered the cold, detached precision of Ronan on the plane, the taste of betrayal, the weight of the paralysis that had nearly ended me. This was no longer about corporate dominance, it was about survival, justice, and integrity. The stakes were no longer financial alone. They were personal, psychological, moral. By evening, the dossier was released anonymously under a pseudonymous investigative account. Social media and financial blogs picked up the report with surgical speed, analysts dissecting the findings, environmental advocates amplifying the consequences, and investors questioning his credibility. The impact was immediate. Ronan's early acquisitions faced scrutiny, some frozen by legal counsel, others delayed by internal boards. The first ripple of the storm had struck. I allowed myself a brief pause, sinking into the couch with exhaustion pressing at my bones. Finn appeared on the secure video feed, his presence calm and steady. "First ripple," he said, a faint smile touching his lips. "Not the wave, but a beginning. You executed perfectly. I closed my eyes, acknowledging the exhaustion, the lingering tension, and the satisfaction of strategy executed without error. It feels hollow, I admitted, voice quiet, almost confessional. Not empty, exactly, but strange. It's not vengeance I feel. It's proof. Proof that knowledge, foresight, and integrity can actually dismantle a man like him. Finn's response was deliberate. And it will, Elara. Not through malice, but through inevitability. His methods are predictable because they rely on deception and arrogance. You are precise. You are patient. And together, we make him accountable. Even in the distance, his calm grounded me. I realized that part of the weight I carried was not the act of dismantling Ronan's empire, but the responsibility of wielding knowledge with care. Every decision could cascade, affect lives, and reshape futures. In my first life, I had been reckless, blinded by ambition and loyalty misapplied. This time, I was measured, aware, ethical. And Finn reminded me that the weight of responsibility was also a form of power. Over the next several days, Ronan's behavior became more erratic. Board meetings grew tense. Advisors whispered of vulnerabilities and hidden liabilities. Investors hesitated to commit to new ventures. He attempted damage control, sending emissaries to attempt influence, but the precision of our exposure left no foothold for deception. Every reaction he had already been anticipated, mapped, and accounted for. Yet the psychological tension was immense. I spent hours awake at night, reviewing every scenario, recalculating probabilities, adjusting strategies. The burden of foresight, while powerful, was lonely. And in those quiet hours, Finn's presence became more than strategic. It was emotional, a steadying force against the creeping exhaustion and unrelenting vigilance. One evening, after reviewing a particularly complex financial loophole Ronan had attempted to exploit, I leaned back and whispered, almost to myself, "He thinks he controls everything. But he hasn't anticipated me, not now, not ever." Finn, observing silently through the secure feed, nodded slightly. "And that is the difference between you and him. He measures value in control and manipulation. You measure it in understanding and precision. He underestimates people. You anticipate them." It was rare, this acknowledgement. I allowed myself to lean back, to breathe fully, to feel the first wave of quiet satisfaction that came from executing a plan that was both effective and ethical. The first wave of exposure had passed. The storm was forming. And we were ready. The next morning, I reviewed the results of the public dossier. Investors were withdrawing from specific acquisitions, boards were delaying approvals, and regulatory bodies were scrutinizing previously overlooked filings. Ronan's name was already whispered in analytical forums, questioning his methods, integrity, and competence. He had sensed the threat and reacted, but the threat, invisible and omnipresent, could not be traced. Finn appeared once again on the secure feed, tone measured but approving. "You've shifted the balance." He knows something is wrong, but he cannot locate the source. That is the power of anticipation, Elara. That is the strength of foresight applied with integrity. I allowed myself a momentary smile, acknowledging the subtle, intoxicating satisfaction of the first strike. Yet, beneath that satisfaction was the clear knowledge that this was only the beginning. Ronan would respond, escalate, and attempt to regain control. And when he did, we would be ready. I closed my laptop, hands lingering over the keys for a brief moment, aware of the mental and emotional toll the past days had exacted. Finn remained on screen, patient, silent, a stabilizing presence I could rely on. In that moment, I realized the true nature of our alliance. It was not just tactical. It was emotional, protective, grounding. He did not shield me from challenge. He amplified my clarity, offered perspective, and steadied me when the weight of foresight threatened to topple me. He had become my anchor in a storm I had learned to navigate alone. And for the first time, I allowed myself to admit a quiet, personal truth. The battle against Ronan was not only about strategy or retribution. It was about reclaiming agency, rebuilding trust in my own judgment, and learning to rely on someone without relinquishing control. In Finn, I found both partner and anchor, a rare combination I had never believed possible. The dossier had been released, the ripple had struck, and the storm was forming. Ronan was aware of a threat but blind to its source, and that was exactly how it had to be. And somewhere deep inside, I felt a surge of something rare, confidence, clarity, and the quiet, unyielding knowledge that the next wave would be even more precise, even more devastating, and completely inevitable. The city was alive with a restless hum, a perfect backdrop for the storm brewing behind closed doors. Every streetlight, every shadowed alley seemed to echo the tension I carried with me. I had spent months orchestrating this delicate sequence of exposure, carefully balancing strategy with ethics, patience with action. And now, the culmination of every prediction, every calculated maneuver, every ounce of foresight was about to bear fruit. Ronan, for the first time, was visibly unraveling. His empire, once polished and unassailable, had begun to show cracks that could no longer be masked by charm or influence. Public scrutiny was mounting, investors were hesitating, and the media, subtly nudged by Finn's coordinated channels, was dissecting every decision he had made. It was not chaos. It was controlled revelation, surgical exposure designed to destabilize without descending into indiscriminate destruction. Finn joined me at our secure meeting place, an unremarkable office I had rented under a pseudonym, its walls bare, its lighting neutral. He leaned over the digital display we had set up, fingers tracing the flow of documents, social media traction, and investor responses. "Everything is aligning," he said, tone measured but charged with quiet satisfaction. "He's reacting, but exactly as predicted. Every defensive maneuver, every attempt to control perception, has played right into our sequence." I exhaled, a mixture of anticipation and exhaustion. "It's almost poetic," I admitted, voice low. "He believes he's orchestrating everything, yet the threads we planted guide his every move." Finn's gaze softened slightly. "Poetry is dangerous when mixed with strategy," he warned gently, though a trace of amusement lingered in his tone. "Don't forget the human element. He's unpredictable in ways analytics can't always anticipate." And he was right. Despite all my foresight, despite the patterns I could anticipate, there was still the raw unpredictability of human emotion. Ronan's ego, his desperation, his rage, they were variables that could shift the outcome in a single miscalculation. I felt a flicker of that old fear, sharp and familiar, reminding me why I had approached this with extreme caution. Our first coordinated exposure began with the carefully prepared dossier, an anonymous, detailed investigation into Ronan's financial overleverage, environmental negligence, and contractual manipulations. Finn's team amplified the dossier with expert commentary, ethical analysis, and data visualization, making it impossible for casual observers, or even his board members, to dismiss. The response was instantaneous. Social media threads ignited with discussion, financial blogs dissected the findings, and investors began withdrawing quietly but decisively. Boards called emergency meetings, legal advisors flagged potential liabilities, and journalists probed for confirmation. Ronan, blindsided yet aware of the attack, attempted to counteract. But every move he made was anticipated, every maneuver countered, every diversion exposed by our meticulous timing. I watched it unfold with a cold, analytical precision, my pulse steady even as the excitement of impending victory thrummed beneath the surface. The difference between this life and the one I had lost was stark. In my previous life, I would have been consumed by rage, by the desire for direct confrontation, by the intoxicating pull of revenge. Now, I operated from foresight, strategy, and integrity. Destruction was a consequence, not a goal. Finn observed silently from across the room, his presence steadying, a tether to reality amidst the chaos. "Remember," he said softly, "he's dangerous, not because of intelligence, but because of desperation. Don't let the chaos pull you into reaction." I nodded, appreciating the subtle power of his words. He did not command, he guided. He did not dictate, he anchored. It was a partnership built not on dominance, but on mutual respect and trust, a rare thing in a world dominated by ambition and manipulation. By mid-afternoon, Ronan's response had escalated. He began contacting advisors, initiating damage control, and attempting to frame the exposure as an unfounded attack. Yet every message, every press release, every attempt at narrative control was countered before it could gain traction. Our analysis, predictive algorithms, and strategic timing had placed us always one step ahead. He could react, but he could not anticipate the precision of our moves. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and unease. The exhilaration came from the unfolding success, the tangible unraveling of the empire that had once threatened to end me. The unease came from the intimate awareness that this was not just a battle of corporations, it was a battle of intellect, ego, and psychology. Every step we took was a mirror held up to his ambitions, every exposure a reflection of the ruthlessness that had once sought to control me. That evening, as the last wave of responses rolled in, Finn joined me privately in the small office. The glow of the city lights spilled across our faces, a quiet contrast to the storm we had orchestrated. He stood close, not imposing, just present. "You executed perfectly," he said, voice low. "Not just strategy, but judgment. You maintained integrity while dismantling him. That is rare." I exhaled, relief mingling with the residual tension of the day. "It feels surreal," I admitted. "I anticipated this outcome, but living it, it's different. There's still a part of me that remembers the betrayal, the cold calculation, the sense of impending death." Finn's hand brushed mine briefly, a subtle gesture, steadying. "And that memory is what sharpens you," he said. "But it doesn't define you. What defines you is how you act with clarity, intelligence, and ethics. You've turned a near-fatal betrayal into a tool for justice and creation." I looked at him, really looked, and felt a rare warmth in the midst of calculated chaos. He did not romanticize my pain. He did not demand emotion where there was strategy. He simply recognized the reality, anchored me to it, and allowed me to operate at full capacity. There was intimacy in that trust, in that mutual reliance, a connection forged in strategy, ethics, and unspoken understanding. Over the next days, the pressure on Ronan intensified. Boards froze acquisitions, investors hesitated, and regulatory inquiries deepened. His every move was scrutinized, analyzed, and exposed, yet he could not locate the source. And that was the beauty of our operation. Invisibility. We moved like shadows, precise, deliberate, unstoppable. Yet, in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline of strategy ebbed, I allowed myself a fleeting acknowledgement, the presence of Finn. Not just as an ally, but as someone whose patience, caution, and unwavering respect allowed me to breathe amidst the chaos. I realized then that the strength of our partnership was not only in shared intellect, but in emotional equilibrium. He held the line when the world threatened to pull me into obsessive, reckless retribution. One night, as I stared out at the city from the small office, Finn's presence beside me, I reflected on the magnitude of what we were doing. This was not just corporate warfare. It was a reclamation of self, an assertion of intellect, integrity, and agency. Ronan had underestimated the value of foresight, the power of ethics, and the resilience born of survival. He had faced the wrong adversary. Finn's voice broke the silence, soft but deliberate. "Tomorrow we escalate. The final wave will make the patterns undeniable. He will know he is exposed, but he will never know how or by whom. Are you ready?" I straightened, the familiar fire of resolve igniting within me. "I've been ready since the first strike," I said, voice steady, controlled. "This is not just exposure, it's inevitability. He cannot win against foresight, precision, and integrity combined." And in that moment, I realized the truth of what Finn had become, not just an anchor, but a partner in every sense of the word. Together, we were more than strategy. We were the inevitable tide that would wash away deception, arrogance, and betrayal. And for the first time since my rebirth, I felt fully aligned with both purpose and presence. The reckoning was imminent, and I, Elara, would meet it with intellect, precision, and the quiet confidence of one who had faced death, survived betrayal, and found an ally worthy of both trust and reliance. The morning air was crisp, a clean edge cutting through the haze of city life. From my apartment balcony, I watched the sunrise glint off glass towers, each reflection a reminder of what I had once built and what had once betrayed me. Today was the culmination of months of preparation, foresight, and patient strategy would bear fruit. Today, Ronan would see his empire exposed in full, and there would be no shadowy corner left for concealment. I arrived at our secure operations center, the room sterile, illuminated only by the glow of monitors displaying every piece of data, every social feed, every movement within Ronan's network. Finn was already present, reviewing the sequence of disclosures. His calm focus was a counterpoint to the surge of adrenaline inside me. I had grown accustomed to relying on him in this way, his presence both reassuring and quietly commanding. "The final wave," he said, voice low, deliberate. "Every dossier, every disclosure, every insight has been mapped. Once we release, there is no recovery. He will be cornered on every front: financial, ethical, environmental, and public perception. Are you ready?" I straightened, taking a deep breath. I've never been more ready. The precision of the plan, the timing of every release, the orchestration of consequences, it's flawless. We've left nothing to chance. Finn's gaze softened slightly, a subtle acknowledgement of the weight of what we were about to do. Then let's begin. The first disclosures went live quietly, seamlessly, under the cloak of our carefully constructed pseudonyms. Legal loopholes, financial overleverage, environmental violations, and board-level conflicts of interest began circulating in analytic forums, private investor briefings, and selective press channels. Each piece was undeniable, verified, and amplified without trace of origin. The reactions were immediate. Advisory boards convened emergency sessions, investors questioned commitments, and analysts began public commentary on the magnitude of the failures revealed. I watched, eyes scanning monitors, as Ronan's reactions unfolded with the predictability I had meticulously anticipated. He attempted to counteract, issuing statements and reaching out to media contacts, but every attempt collided with the strategic containment Finn and I had prepared. It was not just exposure. It was a surgical dismantling, each piece orchestrated to trigger inevitable consequences while maintaining an invisible hand. Hours passed in tense focus. Finn and I communicated silently through nods, subtle gestures, and secure messages. Each confirmation of disruption, each ripple across social media and investment communities, strengthened the precision of the operation. I felt the familiar thrill of calculated foresight, tempered by the clarity that this was not mere revenge. It was restoration, balance, justice. By midday, the final dossier was released, a comprehensive overview of Ronan's empire, detailing the intricate web of overleverage, misappropriation, and ethical failures. The narrative was undeniable, impossible to spin, impossible to obscure. Public forums, investor meetings, and legal counsel now had access to the same evidence, and the cumulative effect was catastrophic. Boards froze decisions, legal inquiries began in earnest, and his credibility began a rapid descent. Ronan's response, when it came, was a blend of fury and desperation. I observed him through indirect channels. News of his escalating attempts to control the narrative, calls to allies, and frantic internal communications reached me via the patterns Finn had monitored. He was cornered, yet unwilling to surrender, a dangerous combination. But we had anticipated this. Every move he made played into the sequence we had constructed months in advance. As the day wore on, I allowed myself a rare pause, leaning back from the screens. Finn's presence beside me was quiet, steadying. He did not offer guidance or judgment. He simply existed, a tether to sanity in the storm of orchestration. I realized then the depth of our partnership. He did not diminish me, nor did he overshadow my agency. Instead, he anchored it, providing a calm counterbalance to the chaos we had unleashed. "I can't help but feel," I began, voice low, uncertain. "It's not satisfaction." "Not exactly. It's relief, perhaps? Or maybe clarity. I've anticipated every reaction, planned every contingency. Yet seeing it unfold, it's profound in a way I didn't expect." Finn's hand found mine, a subtle yet grounding touch. "It's more than relief, Elara," he said softly. "It's the realization that foresight and integrity, when combined, are more powerful than betrayal or ambition. You've not just dismantled his empire, you've restored balance. And you've done it without compromising yourself." The warmth of his presence contrasted with the cold precision of the day, a rare emotional anchor amidst the tension. I allowed myself a moment of vulnerability, acknowledging that part of me had feared this process would consume me, would transform me into the very thing I despised. But with Finn, I recognized a truth I had long denied. Strength and vulnerability could coexist, and trust could be extended without surrendering control. By evening, the final repercussions of the exposure had taken shape. Ronan's acquisitions were frozen indefinitely, legal inquiries had reached multiple jurisdictions, and investors had withdrawn their support. The man who had once orchestrated my near-death and sought to dominate every aspect of my life was exposed publicly as reckless, unethical, and untrustworthy. His carefully curated public image crumbled under scrutiny, and there was nothing left to manipulate. Finn and I reviewed the results in the quiet aftermath, a rare moment of stillness after the orchestrated storm. "It's done," he said simply, voice calm but carrying the weight of achievement. "The empire is dismantled. The patterns of deception and manipulation have been exposed. And you did it without losing yourself." I allowed myself a long exhale, a release of tension that had accumulated over months. "I did it," I whispered, almost to myself. "Not for revenge. Not for vindication. For truth, integrity, and agency. For me." Finn's gaze met mine, steady, unwavering, and profoundly intimate. "And for us," he added quietly, his fingers brushing mine in an unspoken acknowledgement of trust, partnership, and shared triumph. In that moment, the emotional weight of our journey became tangible. The man who had betrayed me, who had nearly ended my life, was defeated, not through brute force or vengeance, but through intellect, strategy, and integrity. And alongside him, I had discovered an ally who matched me not just in intellect, but in ethical clarity, emotional resilience, and quiet strength. The night descended over the city, a calm contrast to the storm we had orchestrated. Finn and I remained in the office, reviewing the aftermath, planning for the future, yet allowing ourselves a rare moment of reflection. "Do you realize what we've done?" I asked quietly. He smiled faintly, a mixture of pride and reverence.
"Yes."
"And do you realize what you've become?" I considered the question, the months of strategy, foresight, and painstaking preparation. "I've become someone who doesn't fear betrayal," I replied finally. "Someone who can anticipate, act, and protect, not just myself, but integrity itself. Someone who can build a world on truth, not deception." Finn's eyes softened, his hand brushing mine once again. "And someone who is worthy of trust, loyalty, and partnership," he said, his voice carrying both affirmation and intimacy. The night deepened, and with it, a quiet understanding settled between us. We had dismantled a world built on arrogance and betrayal. We had exposed deception and restored integrity. And in doing so, we had forged a bond that was rare, balanced, and unassailable. A partnership grounded not in dominance, but in mutual respect, intellect, and quiet intimacy. As we stood together, overlooking the city lights that glimmered like distant jewels, I felt a rare and profound clarity. The Elara who had died, betrayed, and nearly lost had been reborn, not just into life, but into agency, power, and ethical strength. And alongside Finn, I recognized that the future was ours to shape, with integrity as our foundation and trust as our guiding principle. The collapse of Ronan's empire was complete. The reckoning was final. And in the quiet aftermath, I allowed myself a rare smile, knowing that the world I had fought to reclaim was no longer a landscape of manipulation and betrayal. It was a space of intellect, foresight, and partnership, a home I had rebuilt from the ashes of my own near destruction. And for the first time, truly, I felt safe, whole, and alive. The city's skyline shimmered in the late afternoon sun, golden light spilling over towers that once symbolized ambition, now reflecting clarity and purpose. I stood beside Finn on the terrace of the newly completed Nexus Innovations headquarters, the wind cool against my skin. Below us, employees moved through glass corridors, focused, efficient, alive with purpose. It was quiet, yet charged with achievement. Ronan's empire had crumbled under the weight of its own deception, exposed not by rage, but by precision, foresight, and ethics. Investors who had once blindly followed him now looked to Nexus Innovations with respect, trust, and confidence. The world had shifted, subtly but irrevocably, in a direction that honored integrity over manipulation. Finn's hand found mine, fingers intertwining naturally. "You did it," he said softly, eyes reflecting pride, admiration, and something deeper, trust. "Not just strategy, Elara, but you did it without losing yourself." I let out a slow breath, feeling the weight of months of planning, stress, and survival finally ease. "It feels surreal," I admitted. "To think I almost lost everything. And now, here we are. Not just victorious, but whole." He smiled, a gentle curve that held both warmth and understanding. "Whole because you reclaimed your agency. Whole because you chose integrity over vengeance. Whole because you allowed someone to stand beside you without overshadowing your power." I leaned into him slightly, the intimacy quiet, profound, and unspoken. This wasn't about passion or dependence. It was about partnership, respect, and trust forged in fire. "I've learned the cost of blind trust," I murmured. "And I've learned the power of deliberate loyalty." Finn's thumb brushed my hand, and I realized something essential. Survival and triumph were hollow without someone who honors your mind and heart equally. He had become my anchor, my partner, and the one person I could rely on without compromise. We stood there, watching the city pulse with life, knowing that the battles of the past had created a foundation stronger than any corporate empire. Ronan was gone from our lives, a cautionary shadow of ambition corrupted by ego. And we, Finn and I, were building a future on clarity, intellect, and mutual respect, a home not of bricks and glass, but of unshakable trust and shared vision. Finally, I allowed myself to smile, genuinely, freely. The storm had passed. I was Elara, survivor, strategist, and now, finally, unshackled. And beside me, Finn was steady, strong, and unwavering. Together, we were unstoppable.